almost like clockwork, Warcry has just gotten a whole lot bigger. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me. It's Toast. How are you this wonderful Wednesday? It's always an exciting time when a new FAQ drops, especially when it drops seemingly by accident on a random day unannounced. But it's here, it's official, and there is a whole bunch to unpack. But before we get into all that, it's time to do a little bit of shilling. Please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider supporting me on Patreon or my YouTube members, or buying me a coffee over on Coffee. You'll gain access to bonus content and more, like all of these wonderful people on screen now. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
So it's the Warcry September 2024 FAQ. We're going to go through and just see what's changed and give some first impressions and how I think the game is going to mold around these wonderful changes. So going down to the first change, these are in magenta by the way, we have stuff on the Bladeborn. So basic stuff here. For example, the twist wield and the Teratic cohorts have now been just, added into their grand alliances because they always forget to do this. So they're in here now, that's pretty cool. The first big change is the change to the Teratic cohort. This is very unusual to get an update to an ability so close to its release. However, the Teratic cohort released somewhat broken with their ability, namely the big change here, if I can find it, this right here is the change. Everything else is the same as far as I'm aware, but this bit here has changed. It used to be an attack action, not a bonus attack action, which meant the Teratic cohort ability reaction was actually terrible because you had to use 2 actions to react. One to use the reaction and then one to take an attack action. Now that's been fixed, it now works as intended, clearly, and you now get a bonus attack action, making the Teratic cohort reaction actually good and usable. You love to see it. Going down to some other Briar and Bone changes, these are changes that are going to hit the battle traits specifically, and I called this in my video last week. The Chorus Cabal battle trait has been changed to work like every other Chorus Cabal ability in the game, which is great to see. Basically, you move down 2 inches from your starting position, and then you gain +2 strength. It's outstanding. It's fantastic. I am actually not entirely sure what's changed with the Gloomspite Gits one. The Gloomspite Gits one has changed, but I don't know how. I don't know how it's changed. I can't see anywhere in here from memory what's changed, but apparently it works this way now. It looks more or less identical. It was probably a minor little gribble in there somewhere that's been amended. You'd love to see it though. Gloomspite Gits are now working as intended if they weren't before. Wonderful to see. And the final bit of Briar and Bone change comes with this right here. So these 2 changes here more or less fix and clarify at the same time who gets to use battle traits during souping, and basically you can soup if you are using just Sigma Sigma, doesn't matter what they are. Castlight Hosts, Darkling Covens, Dispossessed, in any mix, get their battle trait, and the exact same thing applies with the Stormcast Eternals, with their Ruination Chambers being added in, importantly, Thunderstrike, Warrior, and Vanguard. Now, interestingly enough, the Sacrosanct were not included in this, which is very unusual, but does have very serious ramifications for Stormcast. I assume that is an oversight, but rules as written, the Sacrosanct can't soup at all, but everyone else can. Kind of weird. Moving on down to the next little bit here, we have, this is a big change. I actually really like this change. If you watch the Wild Dice podcast, I go over this change a little bit, unless it was cut. Can't remember. This is actually a very, very good change. The Grimhold Exile was one of the more interesting additions to the last FAQ, but it ended up being mostly worthless because his ability was a little bit too restrictive. In short, you do next to no damage if you're hitting most things, fairly unreliably, but if you're hitting things, it used to be on 30 wounds or more, you did quite a bit of damage fairly reliably. Now it's been changed that it's now 25 wounds or more, and that might not seem like a giant change. It is very substantial. Basically, every major threat in the game is now in danger of being lodged fire blazed, because 25 wounds covers everything from Vexmore to most of the Ruination Chamber to most of the really big smashy leaders, to like Thoricons, Therodons, Kroxigor. All these things dodged Lodged Fireplace before, and they no longer dodge it now. So that's actually quite cool and gives Order a very interesting ally choice, because he's a very good pick just to have a big burst of damage on a triple, or making the actual Fire Slayers worth taking almost. I still don't think they're very good by themselves, the Fire Slayers I mean, but the Grimhold Exile just got a whole lot more interesting, so I'm a big fan of this change. Very, very cool. And there he is there. 5-4-2-4 profile, 20 wounds, toughness 5, 165 points. Dude's great. I like him a lot. Really, really cool. So coming on down to these changes. I'm not going to go over this massively. I'm going to do a separate video covering the full-on changes to the Stormcast, as well as the Ironjawz, which are a bit further down, as you'll see in a second. But Thunderstrike got some pretty cool stuff. Namely, Thunderstrike gained access to Liberators, which is really cool, because Liberators are really, really good. 150 points, you get, a 3-5-3-4 profile, which is fantastic. Or you get toughness 6, you lose a pip of damage and a pip of strength, but you gain +1 attack. Also really, really good. If you go mega cheap, you still get, wonderfully, toughness 5. And you're a 4-4-2-4, which is the same as the shield, but obviously you lose the shield. These guys are wonderful for their points. Very tanky, great profiles, and as we'll see now, they have a fantastic double, an amazing double called Lay Low the Tyrants. Until the end of this fighter's activation, add 1 to the attacks and strength characteristics of melee attack actions made by this fighter. So basically, these guys are all strength 5 or strength 6 and get 4 or 5 attacks a pop when they're buffed. But there's more. While targeting an enemy fighter with a wounds characteristic of 25 or more, count each critical hit scored from attack actions made by this fighter as crits instead. That is outstanding. These guys suddenly become incredibly dangerous against anything. These guys punch through chaff, they punch through mid-range as standard. You pop Lay Low the Tyrants, you're punching through more elite things, leaders. It's kind of insane, right? These guys are crit 4, so they're hitting for 4 damage a pop, basically. I wouldn't be against putting +1 crit on these guys at all times, right? Going to like crit 5 is a pretty nice increase in damage, especially going for like 2 damage, more than doubling your damage output when you drop Lay Low the Tyrants when swinging against more elite things. That's really, really damn cool. Moving on to Skaven. So I'm going to cover Skaven entirely at another time. Skaven are going to be their own video. No, these are all great. The sniper is rather funny. The rat ogres are very, very good, and this claw load on Norbeast is something else. This is all good stuff, right? You will, if you play Skaven, you will love all this. This is just fantastic. Going down some more though, we get some Ironjawz stuff, and this has caused a massive hubbub in the community because a whole lot of stuff has been removed, a whole lot of stuff's been changed. It's a sad time for people who aren't looking at the big picture. Again, this will be a separate video coming out later this week. Ironjawz, I think, have had a ginormous buff. I think Ironjawz, despite the common consensus, might actually be one of the strongest warbands in Warcry now because of these changes. They were already incredibly powerful. I think they're actually even more powerful now, but that'll take a whole video to go over, and we are going to just skip right past it. But things I absolutely love: 100-point Ard Boys, love them. Shield Bash, love them. My favorite thing though, Brute Wrecker, 6-4-2-2. What a wonderful profile. And Berserk Whirlwind, man, oh, what a great ability. But we'll get over that. We'll go over all that in the future. It's good stuff though. Can't wait to talk about it. The last change, however, it's a lot of changes. The last changes we have are to Bladeborn points. There are a few things that aren't Bladeborn here. Some very key things that aren't Bladeborn that I'll go over when I get to them. But there's pages and pages and pages of changes. And we're going to go over all the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. So right off the bat, right? Daughters of Cain. 15, 10, 10, 10. These are huge point decreases. I assume these are actually pretty good. Like 85, 85, 80 seem like fairly solid chaff points levels. So I assume these are actually pretty good. And this 175 model looks to be like more of a leader. I assume she's also much more takeable. If you're Daughters of Cain fan, this is all good stuff. I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan of these changes though. Fugil Grimna is a very interesting character. He is the most damaging Fire Slayer's leader, but he was also very expensive. You'd usually just take any other 200 point model. He is now much more takeable because his combo of Fugil plus Vol Auric Bane is now 20 points cheaper. Auric Bane is a fairly solid like 3-4, 3-5, 2-4 profile, I think. He's pretty darn good. And Fugil has an ability to make him +2 attacks, right? So you can just bump up his attacks to pretty high. It becomes a bit of a blender on the cheap, right? So these two together are actually a fairly solid combo. So I'm okay with that. And of course, these little duties here, Tefk and Mad, are now a lot cheaper as well. So again, Fire Slayers have got a bit of love here. Will Fugil and Vol become usable as a thing? I don't think so, but there's still very interesting pieces you can take. And a huge thing with this Bladeborn thing, it looks like they're really trying to make it so Bladeborn are there to be Bladeborn you've had that they don't sell anymore are actually usable in the game, but they aren't tweaking them to the extreme. They're not making them so your guys are, these are like the best picks you must take these to be competitive. They're making some interesting models more usable, which I'm a big fan of. I don't think this is sort of like, pay to win, go to eBay. I don't think they're trying to send you to eBay. It feels like these are much more changes geared towards, do you play Underworlds? Have you got these really cool models lying around? Awesome, right? And if you don't have these models, don't go to eBay. You'll be scalped to all hell. Convert, okay? Games Workshop are all for conversions. Just convert this stuff, right? Like there's these guys, all these Bladeborn, more or less, can be used by converting up or kit bashing or doing little tweaks to standard models you can buy. It's not a big deal. Do not go to eBay. It's not worth the exorbitant price. Moving on though, Idoneth. I don't like Idoneth as a faction, but I am a ginormous fan of their Bladeborn. I've loved all of their Bladeborn for a while. They've got some really, really strong picks, and they are all cheaper apart from two of the better picks. Elthane, the Ill-Fated, and Tamiel are wonderful. This was my go-to combo piece for putting in a whole bunch of support on the cheap. It's still very cheap at 165 points and 90 points, but it's still 20 points up from the old combo. But Elthane and Tamiel are actually really, really solid. Tamiel has a pull and Elthane has a net and some really good stats. So them being more expensive, I can kind of see it, but it does seem like a fairly unnecessary increase in points. But that's just me being a little bit salty on that. Everything else here is pretty good. Sirene of the Abyss, minus 35 points. She is very good. So it looks like they've brought her in line with the Black Talons. Idoneth, I've got a name now. Lorai, something of the Abyss, right? They are the same price now with more or less the same stats. Sirene could actually be one of the most interesting tech picks for Order going forward because her ability is phenomenal. It's a straight line ability, right? And basically you can't move. You can't climb, so you can't climb, you can't jump. And that's how that works. So you can use this, you can bring Sirene on the cheap for a fairly good range profile and have this very long-ranged ability that can shut people down. Things that fly, they can't fly. Things behind terrain, they've got to go around the terrain. Things that are on a platform can't get down. Okay? Really, really cool stuff. And for 165 points, this is an absolute steal for such a powerful utility piece. And then we have the Octopus Sephiroth. This guy for 100 points is amazing. If you're taking Sirene, you'll almost always take her Octopus. It's just how it's going to be. And my favorite change, Doing Claw down by 20 points as well. I am all for taking the Crab, for taking the Squid, for taking Sirene, for taking Elthane. Taking a whole bunch of Idoneth Bladeborn just seems like a really fun time right now. There's so many cool models and really funky abilities in this pool that I'm just all for it. So, full Bladeborn Idoneth incoming maybe? Who knows? Going on to the Kharadron Overlords, they have taken another fairly big hit. So a recent addition to the Kharadron Overlord lineups has been Enric Ironhail in combination with Bjorgen Thundrik. Bjorgen Thundrik's fine. The issue has definitely been Enric Ironhail. This guy gets like 6 shots off. It's fairly low damage, but you're crit fishing, right? So you're just unleashing a torrent of fire and hoping you crit something to death. And he was very cheap. At 120 points, he was very, very cheap. And he was often just brought in as a solid range support, right? This has now changed because he is 20 points more expensive. So even in base Kharadron, you have to find those 20 points. He's 10 points more expensive if you consider him as a Bladeborn ally in other factions, because you have to take Bjorgen Thundrik and he's now cheaper. So it's still more expensive out of faction, but in faction, it's kind of weird because he's more expensive to take by himself, which is kind of weird. Everything else here, like Khazgan Drakeskjær was never that good. Like none of these seem particularly fantastic. Garrod Allenson for 60 points could be pretty good, but like that's fine, I guess. Looking at the Lumineth stuff, again, a whole bunch of stuff has gotten cheaper. By a whole bunch, I of course mean just 2. And that's Bahanar, who is now 90 points. I assume that's good. And Mayari Lightcaller for 120 for a mage is solid. And she also has some pretty good abilities. Big fan of that change. Lumineth are already pretty good at the minute. They've always been good, but their battle trait made them even better. And having Mayari be even cheaper is just kind of solid. I can see her being a fairly interesting slot in just for a cheap wizard to lead your warband. Moving on to Seraphon, Kixitaka and co have had even more changes. Kixitaka is now 5 points cheaper. I'm pretty sure he became 5 points more expensive last time. Sure, I guess they're just bouncing his points up and down. Huachi's gotten more expensive, and Zepic's gotten more expensive, which are big changes. Zepic was incredibly cheap for his stats, and Huachi was never used anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Clack Trock coming down by 15 points makes him much more playable. He's just a really cool Saurus. Kind of cool. I still don't think he's worth taking at 175. He's still like disgustingly close to just being a Croxigo point, and I'll just take a Croxigo, honestly. But it's still cool. 15 points is 15 points, right? But Kixitaka being cheaper is always a good thing. Looking at some more of the Stormcast stuff, we have the Sacrosanct Amos Dawnguard being cheaper is fine, I guess. 20 points less for a fairly tanky person is pretty cool. The big winner, in my opinion, here is Averron Stormsire. I'll put his ability up because this ability is actually worth discussing. This ability, Badoosh, is fantastic. Before, at 235 points, it was probably a little bit too expensive to reasonably take. At 215 points, for a 20-point decrease, this ability is really, really good. He's a solid Stormcast wizard. He's tough. He's got a lot of wounds. He's good in combat. He's got a great range attack. He's got your basic Sacrosanct like damage abilities. Then his triple is outstanding. It is the power of some quads, but also better in some cases. It's kind of insane. This guy can just like delete things off the board once per turn with this triple, twice per turn. You've got 2 high triples, right? Averron Stormsire is an absolute single target nuke, and I love that he's cheaper. He's definitely more usable, and one of the few instances where they haven't just made a model playable, but might have pushed him to be competitively viable. Averron Stormsire could be a serious threat going forward. Looking at the rest, we have huge, ginormous points decreases on Vanguard stuff. Minus 40, minus 40, minus 55. These are huge points decreases on your archers, basically. This brings them in line, I assume, with other Vanguard stuff. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head if they're worth taking. Vanguard isn't the most played Stormcast faction, and I am not a master of the Vanguard at all. So I couldn't say, but for these points decreases, if you liked these models to begin with, they are now way more playable. Like, it's crazy how playable they are now compared to what they used to be. So if you're a fan of the Vanguard, check these guys out. Going onto the Warrior Chamber, I have to actually look this up because I am fascinated at why Angrahad Brightshield has taken a 50-point decrease. Like, I know that Vanguard took a 55 before, but a 50-point decrease, going down to 125 points from 175, is kind of insane. let's go behind the curtain a little bit here, right? Let's go Warcry. Let's put Angrahad. Do this live, lads. Angrahad, boom. These guys. Dude, that's pretty good. Okay. This guy was 170 points before. 175 points for a 2524. Wow. They were terrible. They were both awful. Now though, interesting. Honestly, very interesting. 3535 for 155, I guess is kind of fine. I could maybe see Angrahad Bright Shield be taken because she's so cheap, right? Is she cheaper than a regular Liberator? Professional as always, just checking on the fly, right? Where are Liberators? Yeah. No, not quite. She's a Liberator, but with more wounds. But only slightly, apparently. 2 more wounds. Nice. Shure Games Workshop, Shure. Abilities. Okay. Okay, actually, okay. I'll let them off. This double's actually kind of cool. Okay. Let's go back to the thing. I had to know. Okay, I had to know. Yeah, that's an interesting change. And of course, Severin Steelheart also took a bit of a point decrease. You take her to take the other ones. It's kind of cool. Are they worth taking? If you're playing Warrior Chamber, I would maybe just take Angrahad Bright Shield because she's kind of funky. And I'd be tempted to take Oberyn the Bold. But yeah, that's kind of cool, I guess. Definitely playable. Looking at the Sylvaneth, there's some really cool changes here. My favorite change is, I think there's 2, is Galagahan. This guy here is 25 points cheaper. I'll put this guy's stats on the screen. He's a really solid glass cannon, like 10 wounds, toughness maybe 4, but with like 2 attacks, strength 4, 3-5 damage or something. Guy's really cool. A nice little burst of damage from that guy. Big fan of that change. And these 2 here, Skaith the Huntsman and Ithari. Ithari being 40 points cheaper is huge. Ithari is fine as a character, I think, if I recall correctly. Cheap wizard, right? Love to see it. Unlocks Galaka and other things. Skaith the Huntsman for 160 points is fast. Not great. They're not great, but they're fast, and I don't believe they're mounted. They could be. I'll put it up though. They could be mounted. Don't trust post toast. Don't trust current toast. Really cool. I would be tempted to take Skaith the Huntsman in all kinds of lists in order because they are so fast and so reasonably priced. So that's a really cool change too. And the rest are just standard chaff. Some have gotten more expensive, some have gotten cheaper. Sure, I guess. Whatever you say. I will say though, if you are running Sylvaneth, pure Sylvaneth, Galagan becomes a almost auto-include along with the Hornblower, right? There's the Hornblower who gives everyone like +1 attack. Take them as well, plus Galagahan. They are fantastic in Sylvaneth. I wouldn't necessarily take them outside of Sylvaneth because then you have to take Skaith and Ithari, and then that's just points and points and points. It's not worth that point. But in Sylvaneth, when you don't need Skaith or Ithari, great. They are just fantastic little picks to add a bit of utility, a bit of damage to your warband. Going on down to the Beasts of Chaos, Draknar is now 10 points cheaper. Draknar is your Bestigo equivalent. He is still 25 points more than a Bestigo, and if memory serves, he is not that much better than a Bestigo, so probably still worth a skip. Narl is one of the... Narl and Ushktor are both archers. They've become more expensive. They are still cheaper. They are still cheaper than the Ungor Raiders. So if you want Ungor Raiders in your list, you take Narl and Ushktor because they are, you basically save 10 points on your purchase at that point. And Grashrak Fellhoof Grashrak Fellhoof is 20 points cheaper. This is huge. Grashrak was always on the cusp of being very, very good because his, I believe it's a quad, is very powerful. It's a very interesting quad that does all kinds of funky stuff. And he's just a Great British Shaman. So he has access to that really good pull, Devolve, right? So Grashrak is a British Shaman with benefits. He was way too expensive compared to a Great British Shaman though, so he didn't see all that much play. However, with a 20-point decrease. He is now much closer to the points cost of a Great Bray Shaman. So I'd be very tempted to take Grashrak for his utility and his damage on that quad. Definitely worth considering. Kind of cool. Not a automatic include over a Great Bray Shaman, just a very interesting pick, which is, again, what I like to see in this kind of Bladeborn focused update. Speaking of which, one thing that is not Bladeborn is this laddie. Horns of a Shut have been kicked in the teeth again. Last time, their Shatterers became 5 points more expensive, which was a big change to their chaff game. This time, their Demolishers have been hit, and plus 15 points is not a small points increase, especially when Horns of a Shut tend to take 2. That's a 30-point increase to your lists on top of the previous 30-40 point increase on the Shatterers. Horns of a Shut have been incredibly powerful since inception, and these last 2 FAQs have really tried to rein them in. They've lost a lot of their powerful ally support with the Formweight Crusher. They've lost their ultra cheap chaff. They've now lost some of the power in their flame hurlers. Are they now not competitive? I don't think so. They've definitely been brought in line, but you're going to have to find those 30 points somewhere, and that likely means dropping a Shatterer to do that, and that is unfortunate for their model count for sure. Going on to the Khorne Bloodbound though, back to the Bladeborn here. Basically all of them bar Riptooth have gotten cheaper, and they've gotten a lot cheaper in some cases, right? Like look at the leaders here. Mago Redhand minus 25 points. Garak Gorebeard minus 15 points, right? This is all kind of cool stuff. I don't know if these are any good. I've looked through these guys a few times whilst pondering the Khorne Bloodbound, and for the most part, this seems fairly underwhelming. I'm a fairly big fan of Riptooth being just like a fast-moving dog thing, but at the same time, you can just take a regular Fleshhound. Again, if you have the models, this is really cool. None of this stands out as being game-changingly good, but Arnulf being 70 points, that's solid chaff numbers, right? Same with Targo here, also 70 points, right? That's a solid points cost to be at, so that's all cool too. Going on to Nurgle Rotbringers, we have the really cool changes here actually. So Fecular Flyblown is now 35 points cheaper. Fecular Flyblown is a fairly solid ranged wizard, basically, who has a once per game ability to attack an extra time with a ranged attack. This is really solid. For 170 points, sorry, you get your wizard with her wizardy stuff and a once per game micro nuke, which I believe was on a double. So that's kind of cool for 170 points. This is in line with most of their kind of cheap hero takes. So that's kind of interesting. And Gulgok the Butcher and Sepsimus Plaguesworn. These guys are 40 and 20 points reduced respectively. And these guys should be fairly tanky. At those points costs, I assume they are kind of in line with the other Nurgle Rotbringers with an extra wound hero there, right? Probably. So they're probably fine too. Kind of a big fan. They're rolls, so again, don't expect massive changes in stats for their points. I assume they're just now in line with their other stuff. So going on to Skaven. Skaven are surprising because Skaven, their main take was Skabic, and he is everywhere in Skaven. He's a very powerful pick, and Skabic's ability, which does actually need an FAQ to really hammer in how it's supposed to be used, is fantastic, and his stats are also great, and he has not been hit at all, which is really interesting because I could have sworn he would be in here. He is not. So this Skaven's main Bladeborn guy still fully functional, but they've also now got some really interesting picks outside of that. The ones that I'm really interested in are Scritch, Spikeclaw, the Festering Skaven, and the Lurking Skaven. Overall, this bunch of Skaven are now 5 points cheaper, which isn't a huge deal, but 5 points is 5 points, and this gives you a resurrect into your warband, because Scritch can resurrect the Festering and the Lurking Skaven, and in addition, The Skaven battle trait allows you to resurrect other things on the board with a points limit to what you can do. So this gives you a second form of resurrection, which makes Skaven surprisingly hoardy in a very unique way, because Skaven aren't hoardy. This is the thing, a lot of Skaven things are very expensive, so they don't tend to bring hordes onto the board, but with now a cheaper Scritch and their battle trait, they're a horde that just keeps on flowing onto the board. As things die, they just keep coming back. And that's kind of cool. Big fan of that. Slaanesh Cyberites. They've got some love and some hate. If you're running Cyberites as standard, the mortals, then you are going to be a little bit sad because your Slake Slash is now 5 points more expensive. If you're like me, your Hadzu is also more expensive, and that's just really sad. However, if you're allying in Slake Slash and you were taking Vaslak anyway, then there was no change because Vaslak is now cheaper. So there's that. And if you were taking Vaslak in your Slaanesh mortals anyway, again, there is no change. It's basically a nerf onto Slake Slash by himself, which is the main hit here. And again, 5 points might not seem like a lot, but 5 points is often the difference between a list being legal and a list not being legal. So I'm sure that'll cause some issues from time to time. I'm a big fan of Vaslak being a little bit cheaper though. I'm a big fan of Vaslak, really cool. Slaves of Darkness, a whole bunch of changes here. Just everything's changed. The big one is actually not the Bladeborn at all. It's their basic stuff. It's the Chaos Marauders. These guys were cheap as chips, and this allowed Slaves of Darkness to take ginormous hordes of Marauders and then take a bunch of big stuff, right? One of the main reasons that Slaves of Darkness was so good was they had really cheap, really durable chaff with really powerful in-faction pieces to complement that. Well, now their chaff is a lot more expensive. The most common chaff they would bring was the Barbarian Flail because they were cheaper and they had a 3-inch range. They're now 10 points more expensive. In your standard list, you were looking at like maybe 5, 6, 7 Marauders in a list for Slaves of Darkness. Well, that's now 70 points-ish that you have to find if you want to take that same list. You're basically losing a model, possibly two, if you are running Slaves of Darkness before, and that's a big change. Losing a whole model is not an insignificant change at all. So that ain't too great. Looking at their Bladeborn, a lot of their Bladeborn was a little bit weird to begin with, but everything has gotten cheaper. Basically, everything here is cheaper. Crimson Kira is one that stands out to me immediately. Crimson Kira's always been a kind of a funky pick. She's got some fun abilities, some really interesting stat line. At 100 points, she's definitely worth taking if you want that kind of like really fun like model to throw on your list. Is she competitive? I don't think so. But again, she's a really fun model, which I am all for. The rest don't really stand out all too much, apart from Khagra the Usurper and Zarisha Bittersoul. Now, for the uninitiated, Khagra and Zarisha are a combo in some very niche, but very successful Slaves of Darkness lists. Zarisha Bittersoul has one of the best teleports in the game that allows her to teleport Khagra the Usurper into combat, basically. And Khagra isn't fantastic in combat, but she is absolutely solid, and she's a walking tank. She's very hard to kill because she's toughness 6 with like almost 30 wounds. She's a very nasty thing to deal with. She has all the strengths of Slaves of Darkness. She can buff her strength to the moon. It's kind of insane. And this combo is now 10 points cheaper. So that's actually really good. So if you were a fan of Khagra before, then you are eating good. And if you want to play Khagra, then you can now just fit her in more lists. And that's always a good thing. Going on to Siege Arcanites, again, none of this really stands out apart from my boy Teratic. This guy was always kind of cool. He's got a really fun stat line. I'll put it on screen. Badoosh. Every time. But which way is it? Badoosh. I'll get it right one day. Taric's really cool. It's a really solid stat line, especially on the offensive end. And being 10 points cheaper is just a win for Siege Arcanites, I guess, who need a little bit of help a lot of the time. Other than that, though, like Votamist you're seeing, cool. 45 points cheaper. Nice to see. Navia and Turosh being 35 points cheaper and becoming, chaff levels of chaff, I'm sure it's also quite interesting. So look at those guys. Seems pretty darn good. Unfortunately, not all's great for the Vegeta cohorts because they've taken a pretty substantial nerf, and you will see this time and time again in the more popular death factions, because Duke Crackmarrow and all of his support is all now much more expensive. Duke Crackmarrow being 20 points more expensive is a huge increase in points, even though he's still only 160. That's a big increase. So that's not great for those guys. The cool stuff here, though, is the Briar Queen. Big fan of the Briar Queen. She's a fantastic piece in death as a whole. 5 points cheaper. You love to see that. It makes it slightly easier to increase her stats with a blessing, which is always good. The Everhanged being 90 points is fairly not interesting. If I remember correctly, none of the Briar Queen's dedicated stuff, like the Thorns or the Briar Queen Chain Rasps and the Everhanged, were actually that interesting. I'm looking at the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. These are fine. The Ossiarch Bladeborn are not good, because sadly the Ossiarch leaders are all terrible, and this also goes in with their Bladeborn, so like, oh, -5, ooh, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You will likely still not take these. They're cool models, but they're likely not worth taking. Maybe Karu, maybe, but I'm pretty sure their basic chaff is actually cheaper than this. It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. You will likely not use any of those, sadly. And this goes on with Gnome and Senna as well. Again, just not massively exciting. But here's some big stuff. Soulblight Gravelords have gotten another kick to the dick. They're super commonly taken stuff. The Petitioner with Sword, Regulus, points increases, big points increases, right? The Harvester, points increase. So these are guys that you would take in your Bladeborn in your Soulblight Gravelords to basically bulk up numbers on the cheap, because they were cheaper than your basic chaff, and they dodged all of the points changes to regular Soulblight last time. Not this time. They have been kicked right in the teeth. These guys are now completely in line, and if you're taking them before, your lists are now substantially more expensive. So that's unfortunate for you, but also good. Screw you. Goddamn Soulblight Gravelords. Everywhere. One of my favourite changes is Headracker, the Gob of Gork. Another ginormous points change. -55 points. Headcracker, the Gob of Gork, is a really fun character. Similar to Averon Stormsire, Headracker, Gob of Gork is a really cool burst damage mage with a very, very funky ability. I'm going to put that on screen now. I can't remember from the top of my head. Badoosh. It's really, really cool. Check it out. It'll be a fun time. For 170 points, if you're taking Bone Splitters, bring Headracker. If you're not playing Bone Splitters, I can see an argument to take Headracker anyway. Dude is hilarious. I love to see it. Other ginormous changes. Mollog the Mighty. -40 points. Whoo! Mollog the Mighty is already a fairly solid pick. He's not competitive, don't get us wrong, but he's a very high wound, high toughness, 5'10" profile that you would buff with +1 attack, right? And he had some really cool utility abilities. He was a very solid, almost competitive pick. At 290 points, Mollog is absolutely veering on competitive now. That -40 means you can actually bless him, and he's still cheaper than the unblessed Mollog from before. That is insane. You've still got a 10-point discount on base Mollog, taking a blessed Mollog now. Wow. I can see Mollog being taken a lot more now. And unlike a lot of these other things, Mollog is a model that was actually reprinted recently in a set that you might still be able to buy. So Mollog is one of the few models who might see a lot more play. But on the flip side, he's also much more purchasable than most of the Bladeborn on this list. So bear that in mind. Mollog is insane. I am excited to see Mollog players play Mollog more and just be happy. Because people took Mollog before because he was so much fun to use. The model is beautiful. He's such a great character on the boards. And they took him because of that. But now you can take Mollog and he's actually great. Love to see it. Really, really fun stuff. And his Bat Squig is also cheaper. For 170 points, you get a decently durable and very fast flying Squig. And I'm okay with that. That's kind of funky. I love that. So the Batten Squig might actually be playable now, which is really, really funny. But more changes. Zarbag's Git Squig. This squig is one of the few squigs in the game that are actually good in combat, that are actually pretty darn good. They're expensive, but they're now 5 points cheaper than they were before, and you can take, I believe, 3 in a list. So if you want some damage in Gloomspite Gits, you now have it. You have a Mollog on the cheap, and you have Zarbag's Git Squigs, which you can take 3 of, and that's amazing. That's some really, really good damage in your lists. Looking at Ironjawz, these guys have a lot of changes. All these guys here was Hacker, Bonecutter, Basher, and Gerzog Idenskull. Ignore them. Honestly, for the most part. These guys have just been brought in line with the current Ard Boys, but they've got old Ard Boy stats, so they're kind of expensive and kind of awful. So I would ignore them for the most part. I'm glad, for the record, I'm glad that they haven't undermined the new Ard Boys. Had these guys been like 80 points, which their stats kind of indicate they should be, then this would completely undermine the changes Ironjawz have made and the changes that are clearly being made to change the makeup of Ironjawz lists. Had these guys been put into real contention for use, then everything that's been changed in Ironjawz would be for nothing. I am very, very happy that they buffed them slightly, but they didn't ruin the Ironjawz plans. These guys are still awful. Do not take them at all. However, Morgok, Ardskull, and Thug are really cool. These guys are your brute. So what you do is you take Morgok and you take Thug or Ardskull, right? And then you have a fairly cheap points package that gives you like 60 wounds and 2 brutes with you messing. Why that's so good is because before you could take a brute boss as an ally, but that would take up a whole ally slot. So if you want to take 2 Umesen units, you have to take up both your ally slots. Now you don't. You take Morgok, who takes up your ally slot, and he can take in Thug or Ardskull without taking up another ally slot, which is really, really powerful. Having 2 lots of Umesen, 2 big, burly, powerful, wounds-heavy brutes in your list is fantastic. I can see these guys seeing all kinds of play just for their bulk, which is really damn cool. Kruleboyz have a 5 points point reduction on Gickit. Nice. Sure, I guess. Gickit's fine. So yeah, I guess. Why not? Ogre more tribes. We have some more changes. Mange is now more expensive, but Gorlock Black Powder is cheaper. Gorlock Black Powder is a really interesting profile because he has a fairly solid range profile, and he's pretty darn good in melee. He is often seen as a much, much worse version of Hrothgorn Mantrapper because Hrothgorn has a much better range attack. However, Gorlock is much more balanced. His melee is substantially better than War Hrothgorn, so bear that in mind. At 10 points cheaper, I can see Gorlock seeing a little bit more play, but I don't think you would take him over a regular Lead Belcher, sadly. So it's fun to see, but it is what it is. And that's it. That is the FAQ. Like I said, I'm going to go back in for more videos on this, covering the Ironjawz in much more detail, the Skaven in much more detail. I'll likely also maybe go back and put a bit more love and attention to the Thunderstrike stuff as well, because that stuff's kind of spicy too. And more importantly, there's even more, right? Look over here. We have Ruination Chamber, Dark Oath, and Brand's Oathbound still to look at. So we're going to look at those guys again in a future video. But that's all really cool stuff I am looking forward to chat about, because there's a lot of good stuff here. There's a lot of good stuff here. I cannot wait. But that's the end of this quick look at the September 2024 FAQ. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with my assessments, what you're most excited about, and are there any Bladeborn in particular that stand out to you as a thing you really want to use now. For me, I'm a huge fan of those Git Squigs. I love Sireny. I'm still taking Elethane. I've been taking Doing Claw. I'm going to be taking all kinds of really cool stuff. There's a lot of things in there that I'm a big, big fan of, and I just so happen to own already. Are they the most competitive picks? I don't think there are many in there that are going to become hyper competitive, but there's a lot in there that have become a lot more fun. and have opened up the game in really unique and interesting ways. And remember, don't go to eBay, just convert them, just kit bash, right? If you want to take the Morgoth's monster crushers, or whatever they're called, just buy a box of brutes. It's fine, make them look a little bit fancier. No one will care, not even Games Workshop will care, probably. Don't quote me on that one. But before I go, please remember to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, as it helps the channel out an awful lot. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra. Boy howdy, it's me, it's Toast, and we are here once again with the post-Toast credits. As always, a huge shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Armour Enthusiast 7, Andy Morris, CT6497, Girth Demon, The Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Filax, Sable Saber, Brioche, Steve Bean, The Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for all of your support, and I will see you all next time.